Check my reviews. 4 words, said calmly after a Broadway legend told him comedians weren't real actors. It was 1958, Hollywood restaurant, private dinner party, actors, directors, producers. Reginald Ashford was holding court, Broadway legend, multiple Tony Awards, classically trained, stage purist. He was talking about the craft of acting, about the difference between performance and art. Comedy is performance, musical numbers are performance, but real acting, dramatic acting, requires training, discipline. Comedians aren't real actors, they are entertainers. He was looking directly at Dean Martin when he said it. The room went quiet. Everyone knew Ashford was talking about Dean, to Dean's face. Dean took a slow sip of his drink, set it down calmly. "Check my reviews," he said. 4 words, that's all. Ashford was condescending. "I'm sorry." Dean stayed calm. "Check my reviews. Rio Bravo, Some Came Running, The Young Lions. Read what the critics say about my dramatic work, then tell me I'm not a real actor." Ashford tried to backtrack. "I didn't mean you specifically." "Yes, you did," Dean interrupted. "You looked right at me when you said it. You think because I started as a comedian, because I sing, because I make it look easy, that I'm not a real actor. So check my reviews. They disagree with you." Ashford went silent, his face red. Dean stood up. "Thanks for dinner. I'm heading out." He walked out. The dinner ended awkwardly, everyone uncomfortable. 3 months later, Rio Bravo came out. Dean's performance was universally praised, a revelation, genuine dramatic presence, unexpected depth. Ashford saw the film, realized how wrong he'd been. He wrote Dean a private letter. "You were right. I was wrong. Your performance is exceptional. I apologize for my arrogance." 30 years later, in his autobiography, Ashford wrote about that dinner. Dean said 4 words, "Check my reviews." I should have. He proved versatility is the mark of true artistry. I was wrong. Dean was right. This is the story of how prejudice met proof, and why 4 words taught a Broadway legend more about acting than 30 years on stage ever did. Reginald Ashford had earned his credentials. Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London, studied under the best, graduated with honors in 1928. Broadway debut in 1932 at age 26, first major role in 1935. By 1958, he'd accumulated 3 Tony Awards. His first Tony came in 1947 for King Lear, playing the Mad King, one of Shakespeare's most demanding roles. The critics had raved, called it definitive. His second in 1951 for Streetcar Named Desire, playing Stanley Kowalski, raw, brutal, physical. He'd originated the role before Marlon Brando took it to film. His third in 1955 for Death of a Salesman revival, playing Willie Loman, the broken salesman, the failed father. He'd made audiences weep. The biggest plays, the most demanding roles, 26 years on Broadway. Ashford was legitimate, respected, a master of the stagecraft. He was a purist, believed in the craft, in training, in technique, in understanding character from the inside out, and he had very definite opinions about what constituted real acting versus mere entertainment. Film acting, in Ashford's view, was surface, pretty faces reading lines. The camera did half the work, close-ups, multiple takes, editing, not like stage, where you had to hold an audience for 2 hours straight with nothing but your skill. Comedy was even worse, making faces, telling jokes, getting cheap laughs. Fun, certainly, entertaining, but not art, not craft. And musical performers, singers who occasionally did dramatic scenes between songs, that wasn't acting, that was variety, performance, entertainment. Ashford never hid these views. In interviews, in conversations, he was open about his belief that there was a hierarchy in the acting world. Stage at the top, serious film work below that, comedy and musicals at the bottom. In February 1958, Ashford was in Hollywood for a meeting about possibly adapting one of his Broadway shows for film.
While in town, he attended a private dinner party at a high-end restaurant, Chasen's, famous spot, invitation only, industry people, a dozen guests around a large table. Actors were there, character actors who'd worked in both film and stage, directors, a couple of producers, writers, the kind of gathering where everyone had an opinion and wasn't shy about sharing it. The atmosphere was convivial at first, good food, good wine, stories being traded, laughs. Dean Martin was there. Dean was 41, major film star. His partnership with Jerry Lewis had ended the year before, after 10 years and 16 films, comedy gold, box office records, but Dean wanted more. He'd just finished filming Some Came Running with Frank Sinatra and Shirley MacLaine, directed by Vincent Minnelli, based on a James Jones novel, serious drama about a disillusioned war veteran returning to his small town. Dean played a professional gambler, complex, morally ambiguous, no jokes, no songs.
The year before, he'd been in The Young Lions with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift, directed by Edward Dmytryk, World War II drama. Dean played a Broadway entertainer drafted into the Army. He'd held his own against two of the most respected method actors of the generation, Brando and Clift, both known for their intensity, their preparation, their craft. Dean had matched them scene for scene. And he was currently filming Rio Bravo with John Wayne and Howard Hawks, playing Dude, an alcoholic deputy, struggling with addiction and redemption, his most dramatic, vulnerable role yet. Hawks, a legendary director known for getting great performances, had specifically wanted Dean for the role. But Ashford didn't know any of that, or didn't care. To Ashford, Dean Martin was a nightclub comedian who'd gotten lucky in movies, a crooner, a guy who'd made slapstick comedies with Jerry Lewis, an entertainer, not a real actor. The dinner conversation eventually turned to the craft of acting. Someone asked Ashford about the difference between stage and film work. Ashford was happy to hold court. Film has its own challenges, he said, but it's not the same as stage. On stage, you're creating a complete performance. No cuts, no do-overs, just you and the audience and 2 hours to make them believe. Someone mentioned comedy, how hard it is to make people laugh. Ashford smiled. Comedy is a skill, certainly. Timing, delivery, but it's performance, not acting. The goal is different. You're trying to get a reaction, a laugh. That's entertainment. He was warming to his theme now. Musical numbers are the same. Performance, spectacle, fun to watch, nothing wrong with that, but let's not confuse it with acting. He paused, took a sip of wine. Real acting, dramatic acting, requires something deeper. Training, discipline, understanding of the craft, method, technique, years of study. Then he looked directly at Dean, made eye contact, held it. Comedians aren't real actors, they're entertainers. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's not confuse the two. The room went completely silent. Everyone at the table knew what had just happened. Ashford had just called out Dean Martin, to his face, in front of a dozen people. Other actors at the table stared at their plates, uncomfortable. Directors watched Dean's reaction, waiting to see how he'd respond. Dean didn't react immediately. He reached for his drink, took a slow sip, set the glass down deliberately, calmly. Then he looked at Ashford. "Check my reviews," Dean said quietly. 4 words, that's all. Ashford's smile was condescending. "I'm sorry?" Dean's voice stayed calm, even. "Check my reviews. Rio Bravo comes out in 3 months. Some Came Running just finished filming. The Young Lions came out last year. Read what the critics say about my dramatic work. Read what Howard Hawks says about working with me. Read what Vincent Minnelli says. Then tell me I'm not a real actor." Ashford tried to backtrack. "Dean, I didn't mean you specifically." Dean interrupted. His voice was still calm but firm. "Yes, you did. You looked right at me when you said it. You said comedians aren't real actors. I started as a comedian. You were talking about me."
The table was dead silent now, no one moving, no one even breathing. Dean continued, "You think because I started in nightclubs, because I sing, because I worked with Jerry Lewis for 10 years, because I make it look easy, that I'm not a real actor, that I don't have craft, that I don't have training, that I don't have discipline." He paused. Let that sink in.
So check my reviews. They disagree with you. The directors I work with disagree with you. The audiences disagree with you. Howard Hawks doesn't hire entertainers. Vincent Minnelli doesn't work with comedians. But you don't have to take my word for it. Just check my reviews. Ashford's face had gone red. He opened his mouth, closed it, had nothing to say. The other guests were staring at their plates, at their drinks, anywhere but at Ashford or Dean. Dean stood up calmly, put his napkin on the table. "Thanks for dinner," he said. "I'm heading out. Early call time tomorrow." He walked out of the restaurant. The dinner ended shortly after. No one knew what to say. The energy was gone. People made excuses, left early. Ashford sat there, embarrassed, but too proud to apologize publicly, too proud to admit he'd made a mistake. 3 months passed. In March 1959, Rio Bravo premiered. It was a massive hit, one of the biggest westerns ever made. John Wayne, Dean Martin, Howard Hawks directing. But what surprised everyone was Dean's performance. As Dude, the alcoholic deputy, Dean was vulnerable, raw, honest. He played a man destroyed by addiction, fighting for redemption, trying to prove he was still worth something. It wasn't comedy. It wasn't a musical number. It was acting, real acting. The reviews came in, unanimous praise. The New York Times, Dean Martin reveals unexpected dramatic depth as the alcoholic gunman struggling for redemption. This is no comedy sidekick. This is genuine acting. Variety, Martin's performance is a revelation. He brings vulnerability and dignity to a role that could have been a caricature in lesser hands. Time magazine, Dean Martin proves he's more than a crooner and a comic. He's a legitimate dramatic presence. Reginald Ashford saw Rio Bravo in a theater in New York. He sat in the dark, watched Dean's performance, watched him bring depth and humanity to Dude, watched him hold the screen against John Wayne and Ricky Nelson. This wasn't a comedian doing a dramatic role. This was an actor doing serious work. Ashford felt sick. He'd been wrong, completely wrong. When he got home, he wrote a letter. "Dear Dean, I saw Rio Bravo last night. Your performance as Dude is exceptional, raw, honest, deeply moving. You were right at that dinner. I was wrong. I let my prejudices about comedy actors blind me to genuine talent. I let my elitist Broadway attitude, my belief that only classically trained stage actors were real actors, prevent me from seeing what was right in front of me. You told me to check my reviews. I should have checked them before I opened my mouth. I apologize for my arrogance. You are indeed a real actor, one of the best I've seen. With respect."
Reginald Ashford. Dean received the letter, read it, appreciated the apology. He never spoke about the dinner publicly, never used it for publicity, never embarrassed Ashford further. That was Dean's way. Make your point, move on. No need to gloat. The years passed. Dean continued acting. More dramatic roles. More proof that he could do anything he wanted. Comedy, drama, musicals, westerns. He was versatile, professional, talented. Ashford continued on Broadway. More plays, more awards. He was still respected, still considered a master of his craft. But that dinner stayed with him. The memory of being wrong, of being shown up, of learning a hard lesson about prejudice. In 1988, 30 years after that dinner, Ashford published his autobiography. He was 82, retired from the stage, looking back on his life and career. In a chapter about prejudice in the arts, he wrote about Dean Martin. The passage was honest, humble, a public admission of what he'd said privately in that letter 30 years earlier. Quote, "In 1958, at a Hollywood dinner party, I made the mistake of telling Dean Martin that comedians weren't real actors. I was speaking directly to him, about him, in front of a room full of people. Dean said 4 words, 'Check my reviews.' I should have. I'd let my prejudice about comedy actors, my elitist Broadway attitude that only classically trained stage actors were real, blind me to genuine talent sitting right in front of me." 3 months later, Rio Bravo came out. Dean's performance as Dude was stunning, vulnerable, authentic, heartbreaking. Everything a dramatic performance should be. I wrote him a private letter apologizing, but I want to say it publicly now. Quote, "Dean Martin proved that versatility is the mark of true artistry. He could make you laugh until you cried, then turn around and make you cry for real, and he made it all look effortless. That's not just performance, that's not just entertainment, that's mastery, that's craft at the highest level. I was wrong, Dean was right, and his 4-word response, 'Check my reviews,' taught me more about humility than 30 years on Broadway ever did." The book was published, the passage was read. People who'd been at that dinner saw it, remembered that night, nodded in agreement. Dean never commented on it publicly. By then he was in his 70s, still working, still making people laugh and cry and feel something real. He'd proven his point 30 years earlier, didn't need to prove it again. If this story about proving yourself through work instead of words moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that credentials don't make you an artist, the work does. Leave a comment about a time someone underestimated you and you let your results speak. And ring that notification bell for more stories about legends who understood that the best response to dismissal is excellence. In 1958, a Broadway legend told Dean Martin that comedians weren't real actors. Dean said 4 words, "Check my reviews." 3 months later, Rio Bravo proved him right. 30 years later, the Broadway legend admitted he'd been wrong. Because Dean understood something the expert didn't. You don't prove you're an artist by arguing about it. You prove it by doing the work, by being so good that the reviews speak for you, the directors speak for you, the audiences speak for you. Dean didn't need to defend himself that night. He just needed to point to the proof, and the proof was undeniable. That's not just confidence. That's mastery. That's pure Dean.